There was once a woman who felt as though her heart had shattered into pieces. In the quiet aftermath of a personal storm, she found herself living in a small cottage on the edge of a forest, seeking refuge from a world that had grown too painful. Every night, she would lie awake listening to the sound of her own breathing, wondering how something that hurt so much could ever heal. Her days were slow and silent. She moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb the fragile shards of herself that lay scattered within. The pain was her constant companion, an ache that lived in her chest like a cold, heavy stone. She often gazed out the cottage window at an overgrown garden left untended. In many ways, she felt like that garden, once full of life and color, now wild and abandoned. In those early days of hurt, she was certain she would carry her brokenness forever. Sometimes she would wrap a blanket tightly around her shoulders, as though it could shield her from memories that arrived like winter's chill. Memories came of a happier time, a laugh shared with someone now gone, plans that now would never unfold. Each memory was sweet, but each also cut deep, like touching a rose with thorns. In the stillness of her solitude, tears often welled up without warning. She let them fall. At first, each tear felt like it would never stop, like an endless rain. But unknown to her, those tears were watering something hidden, little seeds of healing buried beneath her sorrow. Time passed slowly, measured in small changes. One morning, she noticed a tiny green shoot poking out of the dirt in that neglected garden. It was early spring. The woman stepped outside for the first time in days to look at this brave little sprout. In that moment, she felt a faint stirring inside her, curiosity, a flicker of hope. If this tiny plant could push through the weight of winter soil, perhaps she too could push through her pain. She began tending to the garden bit by bit, almost without realizing it, pulling a weed here, watering a dry patch there. As she cared for the budding life around her, she slowly and quietly began to care for the life within her. Each day she forced herself to step outside. The sunlight felt a little less harsh on her tired eyes. She'd dig her fingers into the earth, and the cool soil grounding her, reminding her that life moves in cycles, seasons of bloom and seasons of fallow. As green shoots multiplied in the garden, she realized her grief too was a season, not a forever state. Just as winter yields to spring, her frozen heart could thaw. There were days when the clouds of sadness gathered again, when all she could do was curl up and cry. But after each storm of tears, she found she could breathe a little easier, as if the weight of sorrow was slowly lifting. Loneliness still visited her, but it wasn't as devastating as before. She started taking short walks in the forest beyond her cottage. Initially, her steps were heavy, her mind replaying old scenes of loss and heartbreak. But the forest had its way of soothing troubled souls. The trees stood tall and patient, as if listening without judgment. The birds sang gentle songs, and sometimes she found herself humming along quietly, the melody vibrating in a part of her that remembered what it was to feel light. One evening, at the edge of the woods, she came across an injured bird lying on the ground. Its wing was bent, and it fluttered in panic. The woman's heart clenched with empathy. Carefully, she scooped up the little creature and carried it home. She fashioned a small splint for its wing and kept it in a shoebox by the hearth. Tending to the bird gave her a purpose beyond her own pain. She fed it, spoke to it softly as the days passed. There was a quiet kinship between them. Both had wounds that needed time to mend. After some weeks, the bird grew stronger, and one bright morning, it flew from her open window into the sky. She watched it disappear into the trees, her eyes filled with tears, not of grief this time, but of a bittersweet joy. Its departure was a gentle reminder. Healing means letting go when the time is right. As spring warmed into summer, the woman realized she laughed for the first time in a long while. It was a small, sudden laugh, brought on by the antics of a pair of squirrels chasing each other across the garden. She was almost surprised by the sound of it, as if it had come from someone else. But it felt good. In that laugh was evidence that the part of her capable of joy was still alive and could be rekindled. Piece by piece, she was gathering herself back together, not into the exact shape she once was. She knew she had been changed forever by what happened, but into a new form, one shaped by both loss and growth. Some evenings, she would sit on her porch and watch the sun set over the trees. Dusk painted the sky in wounds of color, fiery oranges fading to tender pinks and purples, a daily reminder that endings can be beautiful. She thought about how pain had altered her. At first it had closed her off, made her world small and dark. But pain, she realized, had also carved out deeper spaces in her heart. Spaces that could now be filled with understanding, empathy, and resilience. She found herself feeling compassion for others in a way she hadn't before. When she thought of friends or even strangers who might be suffering, her heart reached out silently. I know how that feels. I hope you find the peace you need. Her own hurt had taught her to be gentle, both with herself and others. One day, she discovered an old journal tucked away on a shelf. In it were entries from before her world fell apart, full of youthful optimism and plans. Reading those pages was like meeting a younger version of herself, one who had not yet known deep heartbreak. She smiled at that innocence, and rather than feeling bitter, she felt a tender protectiveness for the person she used to be. On a fresh page, she decided to write again. The words came haltingly at first. She wrote about the garden and the bird and the small victories of her days. She wrote about sorrow and how it no longer felt like a bottomless pit, but more like a tide that ebbed and flowed. Sometimes it would surge, but then it would recede, and in its wake she could see what it had left behind, like seashells after a wave, little truths and lessons glistening on the shore of her soul. In her writing she found a mirror of her progress. The early pages were tear-stained and angry, asking why me, and how will I ever... But as the pages turned, a subtle shift appeared. There were sentences about gratitude for a sunny day, a note of how good the warm tea felt in her hands one cold morning, a line marveling at a new rose blooming in her once wild garden. Without forcing it, she had begun to heal. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but a collection of small, almost imperceptible changes that together formed something new, like a scar forming over a wound, strong and sensitive skin replacing what was torn. Late in the summer, the garden was a riot of color. Lavender, daisies, and even sunflowers had grown tall, their faces following the sun. She invited a couple of old friends to visit. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she knew human connection was the next step in reclaiming her life. They came on a warm afternoon. They brought easy smiles and news of the world beyond. They didn't press her with questions or platitudes. They simply enjoyed the garden with her, sharing comfortable silence and cups of cool water with mint. At one point, one friend gently remarked, "You seem more like yourself today." The woman realized it was true. She had thought that the person she used to be was lost forever. But here she was. Altered, yes, but still herself, and in some ways more herself than ever, tempered by what she had overcome. That night, after her friends had left, the woman walked through her garden under the stars. The flowers gave off a fragrant scent that mingled with the night air. She ran her fingers over the petals and then over the faint scars on her own skin. Signs of little accidents from gardening, cooking, living. She understood that emotional wounds leave scars too. She closed her eyes and reflected. Those inner scars, memories of heartbreak and loss, would always be a part of her, but they no longer pained her when touched. They had become stories, lessons, even symbols of her strength. Each scar, inside or out, told her, "You survived. You healed." They were not ugly marks of shame or weakness. They were like the gold lines in a mended piece of pottery, adding character and beauty through imperfection. Healing, she realized, was not about returning to who she had been before, but about integrating what happened into who she was now. It was about letting the pain transform her in a meaningful way. She had learned patience from suffering, because there is no hurrying the heart to mend. She had learned that healing isn't linear or neat. It's messy, with progress and setbacks, but that's okay. And she learned that just as a garden needs tending, so does the wounded soul, with care, attention, and love. Under the moonlight, she felt a swell of emotion, but this time it wasn't grief. It was fullness. She was alive, and she could feel the thrum of life in her veins again. As she looked up, the night sky was vast and speckled with stars, each one a tiny light punctuating the darkness. She thought of how even the sky bears scars from ancient explosions, yet it remains breathtaking. In that moment, she made a quiet promise to herself, to live fully, as a tribute to all she had lost and all she had found. The next morning, she woke to sunlight and birdsong. Stepping in front of the mirror, she saw a face that had known tears, but was softer around the edges now. There was a calm in her eyes that wasn't there before. She smiled, genuinely, warmly, at her reflection. It struck her that this smile, too, was a sign of healing, as real as any scar. It meant joy had returned in some measure, and with it, a readiness to embrace life again. Our wounds may always be a part of us, she thought, but they also make us who we are. They can teach us to cherish every gentle moment of happiness, because we know what it means to have felt despair. They can make us kinder and more understanding, because we never truly know what silent battles others are fighting. The woman stepped outside to water her blooming garden. As the sun climbed and day began, she felt something like contentment, like hope alive in her chest. The scars within her had not vanished, but in the light of a new day, they had blossomed into something new. In their own way, those scars had bloomed, turning pain into strength, loss into wisdom, and a broken heart into an open one, ready once more to give and receive love.